Right. 5:32, we have a quorum. I'll call the meeting to order. First thing on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. So I'd entertain a motion to approve the special meeting February 1, 2023 minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the special meeting of February 1st, 2023.
A second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
I'll abstain because I wasn't here. So motion's passed. No, there's no public, right? So we don't have any public participation tonight unless the little one over there has got something to say, but he's got his earphones on. I don't have any communication, so we'll move right on to new business, OPEB plan with Miller.
Thank you for having us. I apologize for the font, but I just used my best joke. East Windsor's numbers are so small that, you know, we had to
Oh, yeah.
print them that way. My name is Sharad Arora, and this is Scott Lindbergh. We work on both your OPEB and pension plans. Personally, I do about 90% of what I do during the day is OPEB for municipalities throughout Connecticut. Scott pretty much does the same, except he dabbles in pension also. So what we want to do today, I'll just give you a quick highlight. We wanted to go through the latest valuation, which gives you the actuarially determined contribution for the upcoming fiscal year, 23-24. And so we want to walk you through that. We want to walk you through a couple ideas or suggestions therein. So without further ado, let me just jump right in, and I'll apologize one more time for the smallness of the font. So in your packet on the first page, in the far left column, was the last liability calculation and ADC, the actuarially determined contribution. So at the top of the page, the liability was about 2.4 million. And that resulted in, and please interrupt anytime with questions. If there's any general questions or OPEB 101 or anything you want to know, please let us know. The liability was about 2.4 million, and that's just basically an actuarial present value. And that resulted in an ADC of about 148,000. And the way East Windsor funds is you take what you are going to pay out in retiree benefits, and the delta of the two is what we suggest you put into the trust. So actually, you're based on the fact that you have a lot of police retirees and their benefits are such. In that first column, it's actually a negative ADC or a negative net budget impact. I apologize. And so you really, in that scenario, have to contribute nothing. Okay. We move over to the next column, and so that incorporates.
He's from Webster.
Got it. The updated demographics column updates the new census that Amy provides us and other folks here in East Windsor provide us, as well as an update of what happened to your per capita costs. And I know you made a very good move to the state partnership plan that's worked out for many municipalities. And we're hoping it's sustainable. And there's been some talk, there was some funding by the state to help prop it up a little bit, but by and large, it's working well for most communities. So in that second column is a combination of two or three things. It's an updated census, updated per capita costs, and the three main drivers to the liability going from 2.4 to 3.1 million were as follows. We had a couple retirements that were early. So when that happened, we expect people to wait a certain amount of time before they retire. And if they leave a little bit earlier than we expect, that increases the liability, because all of a sudden now we're paying them out right away. So just as a round number example, if we expect the average retirement age to be 62-ish, and one of your police officers retires at 58, that's 4 more years of payments that have to come due right away. In addition to that, on the Board of Ed side, you have a handful of non-Medicare eligible teachers. Those folks tend to be expensive, and if you look at the state plan premiums that, you know, now and when it first came out, that is illustrated in how the state plan charges you premium. So active, and again, I'll use round numbers, an active single is about $1,000. A pre-65 retiree might be something like $1,300 per month per single. But whereas a 70-year-old retired teacher that does not have Medicare, their premium is more like $2,000 or $2,200. So it's double, because Medicare takes care of so much. So this is not a surprise. You've had this population of 4 or 5 teachers all along. But they do, as time goes on, and you know, without being punning, if they don't pass away, if they continue to be on your plan, they cost that much more. And the last factor is the actual state plan premium compared to our assumed medical trend was slightly higher. So those 3 things in combination gave the liability a little bit of a jump. I'll pause there. Any questions so far?
We generally assume 62 or do we ever assume like a certain amount of our folks are gonna retire at 55 because they came in at 21, they worked at 20 and.
Great question. So we don't, and this is throughout the state, with all the plans, if they don't do this, they should be doing this. We have what's called rates of retirement. Okay, so we expect 4% of that person to retire at 55, 10% to retire at 56. It's an incremental.
Okay, got it.
And so when I use an average, if we crunch the numbers, you know, 62s are usually a good number if you look at that array.
Thanks.
Sure. So that bumps it up to 3.1, which in the middle of the page equates to a actuarially determined contribution of about 222,000. And the same way as the updated census and the updated per capita cost increase the liability, they also increase, if you look at the number right below the 222, 202,000, you're paying out more in benefits, like that additional retired officer. So the way East Windsor's funding on a net budget impact, it's not a straight line. We don't go right from 148 to 222. We take the delta and we end up around 19.8, around 20,000. So not a huge jump. The plan has been pretty steady. Some ups and downs. Okay, some years where we had gains in the actuarial liability, some years we had losses. But overall, East Windsor's done a great job of putting money away. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, you know, when do we start using that money in a couple minutes. So in the next column over, updated assumptions, and that's basically our expectation of future trend. Every couple of years, we update that. We look at long and short-term trend. And so in addition to that, there are new mortality assumptions that are used statewide, very standard tables accepted by almost every auditor we work with. And they've been updated over the last few years. The biggest update was that the Society of Actuaries finally came out with a table for mortality that was public plan based. That was a big, you know, that's as exciting as it gets in our world. Is a new mortality table that's got public data behind it. Because all the years prior, we've been using mortality tables that basically had what I call commercial data or corporate data. And that's not, you know, it's not the same population. But either way, those 2 assumptions had very little impact on the liability. I'll jump right to the ADC in the middle of the page. We went from 222 to 229, a slight bump in benefit payments, and still your net budget impact is still 24,000. Again, I'll pause quickly and see if there's any more questions. So the last column has to do with page 2. And you'll see there's no difference in the numbers in the last column. The ADC is still 229 with a net budget impact of 23,000. So page 2 of your packet, which has a page 15 at the bottom. This was the ADC page from the 2020 valuation. And you can see, if you kind of peruse the top, you can see the numbers that jump out immediately.
Thanks, yeah.
Darren, did you get one?
Yeah, I just brought one down there. So you can see the two smallest numbers on the top row are town and Board of Ed non-certified. Essentially, none of those folks take OPEB retirement. They have to pay 100%, and we assume 1 out of 10 retirees on the town or Board of Ed non-certified side will actually take retirement, 10%. So it's a very, very small number. They usually have spouses or they wait till Medicare and get an AARP plan, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, the bulk of your liability is with police officers that have direct subsidy. They pay 50%, Amy, if I'm remembering that right? Right.
25.
Some
25.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely right. And then teachers, which while they pay 100%, there's a lot of implicit subsidy. Where, as you can see from the state plan premium, the blended premium that we charge for cost share is 1,000, again, round numbers. Whereas the true cost that you have to cut the check to the state plan for is more like 1,300. The police and the teacher group are the bulk of your liability. So if you look at the town and Board of Ed non-certified, there's kind of a disconnect between the first row and the second row. So Amy asked us to research it, and we actually had a conversation with her a couple of days ago. What happened in the 16 through 18 time period was we had a new calculation. Amy was using a number that they had excess monies to be put away. A combination of events caused us to put a little extra into the town bucket. Just because, I mean, there's no, really, there was nothing wrong with it, but we want to just kind of look at it today and maybe reset which bucket that asset goes into. Because with the liability on the town side being almost zero, for lack of a better term, 15,000, and the non-certified side, 6,000, that asset allocation didn't make sense to us. So if you flip to the third page, and this is very common through, 80%, 90% of the plans we work with, is we're suggesting that this year we reallocate the asset based on the liability. So if you flip back to page 2 and you look at the fourth row down, funded ratio, I mean, look at the town, 1,200%, 32% for police, et cetera, 465%. But if you stay with the last page, you can see that it's 52.9% all the way across.
All right, so somebody asked me,
Mhm.
why aren't we just moving the town portion to the police? Because those are our two responsibilities.
That's something.
It's a washing.
At the end of the day, none of the totals change. You're 100% right. And one of the things, Amy, we talked about is we could just show 2 columns in the report. I mean, and that's completely up to you guys. But
Town
the,
versus school versus having the police broken out.
Police are part of the town,
right,
as far as I'm concerned. I mean, they're under our budget.
100%. And the only redeeming value I see to keeping the 4 columns is just to spike out how little we expect retirements to occur on the town or non-certified side. But that's the only reason I would suggest keeping it. We are ambivalent. If you want to switch them together and show it as one number, we haven't published the final report yet, and we're happy to do it either way.
My thought is,
police or town employees, you know, I understand what you're talking about in terms of the. Splitting of the silo, I guess, but they're under our umbrella anyway, they're our employees. to deal with.
When we're determining like the cost of benefits and stuff with, you know, with the contracts, when we're looking at contracts. Is it valuable to know this difference at all?
Well, the cost is the cost, no matter who you are. It's all the same premium for retirees.
But
But the cost is tied to how much they get. Right, so on a town employee, a clerical employee at the town hall, they get nothing. Police can get as much as 75% of it paid for. So that's really where it matters. Not so much because the premium is what the premium is. When the state gives us our numbers, we don't do a blended like the school does. Because they have to statutorily for teachers.
Correct.
But on our side, we have, our active employees are that $1,000, the retirees are that $1,300. That's actually our split when we charge our people. But the big difference is whether they pay 25% or whether they pay 50% and also what they pay for their spouses. So that's what really matters on our side, is the contributing part, not so much what the premium is, because the
Right.
premium is the same for everybody.
Right, that's very well put. So the direct subsidy for police is the only difference. The total cost is always the total cost. I mean, you can, if you guys want to decide here, happy to, you know, go back to the office before we publish, or if you want to get back to it, 100% up to you.
No, I think, I agree. If there's no difference on this side, then we just collapse them into two.
Board and town.
You good with that, Patrick?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Adding your two Board of Eds together. So instead of having 4 columns like we do right now,
Yep.
certified versus non on your side, just having a Board of Ed side and just having a town side.
I mean, I'm okay with it. I mean,
Okay.
I'm not the one that does the work. I mean, it'd be Ryan and Lauren, but I mean, it makes sense to me.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it really doesn't matter. This is where, well, when we ask for the budget numbers,
Yep.
this is where we ask for it from, that sheet. But instead, it would just be, instead of adding 2 Board of Ed columns together, and if they're negative, you can't take the negative, you can only pay the positive.
You know,
Correct.
So if they're all together, then it wouldn't matter. It
yeah,
would just be the one.
yeah, I mean, I don't see
So I
any
think,
issue with
I
it.
think we do that, town versus Board of Ed.
And here's the thing. Under the hood, nothing is gonna change. We're still gonna collect the census. We're still gonna bucket people based on what they should have for direct subsidy versus no direct subsidy. So what we do to create the totals, none of that's gonna change. And if 2 to 4 years down the road, you're like, hey, we think we might do X and Y with some town contracts or non-cert contracts, and you wanna go back? No problem. So we'll squish it for the final report.
Okay.
Okay. So the last item is, when do we start using this money? We've got $1.7 million sitting in a trust. So when do we start using it? Anybody wanna cut checks? Anybody? The short answer, sorry, my joke's not working.
I liked it because I gave you.
Really, the short answer is, anytime we see a plan, it used to be, let's accumulate the asset, let's get to 70–80% funded. That's not the case anymore. We see a lot of towns, when they get to that 30, 40, 50% range, you know, board members start asking, hey, we got all this money sitting around, when do we use it? When do we use it? So the short answer is, you can start anytime you want. And really, for the general public and most people that are readers of this information, it runs like a pension plan, and they understand that slightly better than what this approach that we're taking, which we call net budget impact, where currently you're paying premiums out of your insurance or general funds. Okay, the eventual goal of this trust, the reason you've done such a great job to accumulate it this far, is to pay those retiree benefits out of the trust. Okay, so it's just a shifting of line items. What you would do is you would put the full ADC into the trust, hopefully in July or August, that's usually what we recommend, so that you. And then, as the, state plan premiums come due, you talk to your TPA or you talk to the auditor and see if they're okay with a pass-through. Either you cut checks directly out of the trust, or you do it, you know, through an internal mechanism. As long as your paper trail is good, I don't think the auditor is gonna care. The biggest,
Bob might care.
I can do it either way. What I've seen is to set up a dedicated DDA account just for those premiums. That way, all the activity is
So,
related.
and depositing the people's checks in there too, because that's the other half of it. Right now,
Yeah,
the people pay us checks
right,
and we deposit them against our health insurance
right.
line.
That's what I've
There's just
seen.
an offset
It's a
to,
big issue because obviously you're removing trust assets into a so-called non-trust type account, but I've worked with other attorneys, accountants, TPAs, everyone agrees that the easiest way to do it is to put it into a
so basically having
DDA
a
account
checking account.
that's labeled, you know, they're dedicated just for those types of transactions, and that way it facilitates an easy ACH transfer, which is something I can't do in the trust,
Okay.
so.
so can I ask you a question along those lines, is. When and how do you move that around, and will that DDA portion not earn the same as the trust?
Yes, it wouldn't.
Yeah, wouldn't,
So
right.
that's something
Yeah,
to
since
think
our-
about.
Historical return is something north of 6.6%. No,
Right.
we're not gonna find that in the DDA, but if you limit it just to the cash flow need, let it sit in the trust, and when you need it, send me an email, we transfer it to the DDA, and then it goes out from the DDA. Usually the insurance outfit likes to come in and take it.
Right.
I don't know if you're comfortable with that, or you like to initiate your own, I'm not sure,
We
but.
still write checks.
Oh, yeah, ACH is usually the way to go.
I think that's a phenomenal idea. If you can leave it in there until, you know, I don't know if it's monthly or.
Yeah, we
How
pay, we pay.
monthly. If we could leave it in there till the last minute, then we're earning as much as we can while it's not being used for retiree benefit payments.
Right.
So as I was headed towards, the biggest bonus to treating this like a pension fund where the town contributes the actuarially determined contribution and pays benefits out is A, it's understandable by a lot of folks. B, now you're earning a little bit more each year. Because the way you're doing it now, it's a true up, and you're really only getting the benefit of a few $1,000s. Whereas now you can have $200,000, roughly speaking, earning money for about 10 months. And boom, your asset grows, you know, at a higher clip. On the flip side, the only drawback is, and since you're fully insured, it really doesn't matter, is, you know, if you have a bump in how much, like this past year, we had one or two officers, I think it was Scott, that retired a little bit earlier. You know, you have a nice steady monthly retiree cost. When there's a bump, the trust will be the beneficiary or the loser on those monies. But in this size situation, I don't think that's gonna really move the needle. I think the biggest bonus is you have a couple $100,000 working for you soon. And again, it's not a decision that has to be made today. You know, maybe the thing to do is talk to these guys and set it up for July 124. We don't have to try to squeeze it in for July 123. I don't think there's any rush. You guys are in great shape. We weathered the storm on the assets, on the pensions. We had one good year, one not so good year. We're past that. I'm expecting the normal small ups and downs. I'm sure these guys will agree. We hope.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Hey, we're conservative by nature. We always throw the down into the conversation. That is all we had. I hope we didn't take up too much of anybody else's time.
It sounds like that we probably you guys need to talk back and forth, how you guys, if it works out and what the numbers actually would be. So maybe we'll continue this conversation next time.
Works for me.
Any other questions? Right. well,
Way
thank
off
you.
topic, sort of, but you said that there is a significant difference in lifestyle or life expectancy
Mhm.
between municipal and private industry.
Mhm.
In one sentence or less, who wins? Who lives longer?
Even small
Miracle.
place.
Municipal lives longer.
All day, every day, except for safety. I mean, that's a different story.
That's kind of what I was thinking, that those guys, they got some serious health
It,
problems.
it's a catch-22. So by installing that table, it increases your liability because we now know they're gonna live longer, but it's reality. It's reality. Municipal employees, hands down, live longer. You know, they tend to stay, within 1 or 2 towns their entire career, so that their life is more stable, for lack of a better term, and they don't have the stress of the runaround of corporate America, although I know we're all busy, so I don't know what that means one way or the other.
Thank you.
But that was 3 sentences, but the
that
answer is municipal.
We're good. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Appreciate your time. Here's a extra copy.
Thanks.
If you guys come up with any questions over the next few weeks, let us know. All right.
Perfect.
Okay, thanks again. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to the pension fund update.
All right, good job.
You got room? I can see it. Okay. Well, let's turn to page 2 and I'll look.
No, yeah, sounds, but that's
And then we'll transition over to Bob and he can go through the portfolio, the positioning. And the performance. So I always like to start, give you a little update on the market. So for the quarter ending 3/31, the S&P 500 was up 7.5%. International markets, the developed markets were up 8.47%. Emerging markets were up 3.96%. And even the bond market at the last minute was up 2.33%. It did spend most of the quarter near flat, little negative until the banking news hit the TV. So, and there was a little run to safety. So that did drive up the overall return as people were shifting their assets from equities to fixed income. But so pretty good market performance overall, a good start to 2023. Basically fueled by the view that the Fed would ease monetary policy in the near term over the next few months. The market believes that the Fed will pause, and they believe that ultimately the Fed will start cutting rates during the month. And that was before today. But that's kind of the view of the market. They don't believe that the Fed is going to continue to fight inflation. Even though the metrics have been coming down, we talked about that a little bit, CPI, their PCE, ISM manufacturing services, all of these inflation measures have been declining over the last 6 to 9 months. So the market thought, especially given the banking issues, that they would stop and ultimately cut. And then today, I forget if it was 2 or 2:15. It was very clear that they were still concerned about inflation, even though CPI is at 5%, the target's 2%, so we're pretty far off. So even in light of the banking issues, and that's consistent really with our view of it. Even though the market was optimistic, we didn't quite share that same level of optimism. Our group looks at it, we believe that rates will be higher for longer. We believe that inflation will prove to be stickier. There are components of the CPI that will not come down as much as the market expects it to come down. And we do believe that although labor will moderate to some degree, we still believe that it will remain strong, and therefore consumer spending will remain strong. So our position is that a recession possibility does exist. We just don't see that it's an event for 2023, perhaps 2023. So, and going forward, we'll just have to continue to wait for those numbers to come out. New CPI number, I think, comes out on Friday. So we'll see how that looks. First quarter earnings are always a focus. I say this in every one of my presentations. So, and it's important not so much how we did, but what's the guidance going forward. So guidance is somewhat mixed. I mean, there's a lot of good earnings beats. There were some that didn't do so well. Certainly the banks haven't done that well, given the issues there with the deposit runs. But all in all, so far, the earnings have been pretty good. So it kind of supports the idea that the consumer employment will be pretty good. The ADP job report came out. There was almost 300,000 new jobs. So that was a kind of a surprise. So, as long as employment remains strong, we believe that consumer spending is strong. And it will be hard for the Fed to get those rates and cut them at the end of the year. So we're just not big believers that that's going to happen at this point. So we'll continue to watch it. Data dependent. The Fed said they would be data dependent. So we're just going to continue to position the portfolio as we have in the past. We're neutral on equities, and we've been coming up a little bit on the fixed income. And I'll let Bob talk a little bit about what our thoughts are as far as positioning going forward. But ultimately, we don't see making any substantial changes to the overall allocation in the portfolio in light of all the events, including what's happening in the banking side. Questions at all about the state of the economy? All right, well, with that, I'll transition over to Mr. Maglio. Walking through the portfolio.
Thank you. If everybody will go to page 3, we can look at the portfolio summary as of March 31st. You can see the top left, that's the overall asset allocation. Like Bob said, we are pretty much neutral, in line with the target. We're at 61 versus 60. To Bob's point, we came into the year still concerned about inflation and the Fed policy, whether they're going to continue to hike, for how long, if they were going to pause. And we positioned a portfolio in a way that we were neutral on equities. And then on the fixed income side, you can see we're at 36.5 versus 40, basically in line if you add in the cash, so it's at 38.5. But what we did on the fixed income side, in anticipation of the Fed continuing to raise rates, was we went short in duration. We were of the belief the Fed was going to hike rates past the 5%. We're at 5 to 5.25 now. But we had believed back in the last Fed hike that they were going to do 50 basis points, and that was prior to the strain on the banking system. That's kind of changed things. And Bob's first slide showed that the bond market did 2.5% in the first quarter. So we were short duration. And what happened in the first quarter was, like Bob said, there was a flight to quality. So prices went up, yields went down. So we were short duration. So we slightly underperformed on the fixed income side, but we were tactical in being short duration. Worked for the first 2.5 months of the quarter, and then Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, First Republic Bank. And then as I got out of the car today, PacWest looks like they're up for sale. They were down 40% after hours. But don't worry, the Fed came out today, and after he stuttered, he said he thinks there is no contagion in the banking system. So we have that.
We still have big banks that are ready to buy the smaller banks.
Exactly. So the repositioning of the fixed income was working in the year prior to the strain on the banking system. But we're very comfortable with the overall positioning portfolio. We have some treasury bills coming due this year. When they do come due in September and December of this year, I'll be looking at the duration of the portfolio and whether to add them to some longer duration bonds, being the index, the iShares government index, or continue to buy treasuries just based on where we are in the economic cycle and whether or not we're getting closer to a recession at that time. Any questions on asset allocation at all? And I'll get back to some of the talking points in a few minutes, but the bottom right just shows you where we started year to date and where we finished as of March 31st. So we had 2 consecutive quarters of positive performance now, after 3 consecutive quarters of negative performance in 2022. So we had a total return of 4.88. You'll see the third number down, we were almost at 33 million. As of March 31st, we're at 34,100,000 for a total return of 4.88%. The left-hand side of the page, the only thing that really changed as far as the percent of market value is international markets. The international markets have had a really nice run the last 2 quarters. We have been and continue to be underweight international markets. Part of what drove international markets in the fourth quarter and the first quarter of this year, in the fourth quarter, it was Beijing reopening that had a strong effect on Europe. China started being a mass consumer of European products. And not only that, I'm sure everybody remembers back in 2022, at the beginning of the year, we were dealt another blow when Russia invaded Ukraine. So instead of just focusing on the Fed, we had that to worry about. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Where was I, Bob?
Just on the
Emerging markets.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. So Beijing, yes. And then Europe did not suffer as much of a cold winter as anticipated. And Russia had been manipulating natural gas last year with the shutdown of the pipeline. Long story short, Europe has much more natural gas in storage than they had anticipated at the end of last year, which should really help their economy going forward. So they avoided a recession. Their inflation is still high. They just had a report last week. It's coming in a little bit higher than anticipated. Their central bank is continuing to raise rates. They're a little bit further back in the rate hiking cycle than we are. We're more towards the end of it. They're still in it. Still believe the underweight is warranted. Just it was two things that really helped their economy. So, any questions at all on any of that?
Yeah, I don't see that getting better this year.
It all depends. If the US were to go into recession, Bob said that, you know, our thought is it's not going to happen in 2023. If the US goes into a recession, it's going to become, I believe, a global recession, which then could hurt international markets. If it were to stay steady as it goes, we do avoid a recession. It's a possibility that international markets could continue to outperform the US. But I'd like to digest some of the data too going forward. I'd hate to chase the international performance. If you look back over the last 10 years, it's happened several times in there where international has lagged for a very long time. So much so that you get this big pop and then everybody's big into international again, and then you chase that performance. And I want to see more steady long-term performance before we start chasing that. Okay. That's it. Any questions at all? The next page is just the rolling 4-quarter asset allocation. So the furthest to the right column would be Q1 2023, and you can see we're at basically 55% in US large cap. We are underweight. We are 1.2% in small cap. Part of the benchmark, we have 5%, the Russell 2000, so that is the small cap benchmark. The idea behind underweighting small caps for this whole time has just been higher interest rates typically will hurt the smaller businesses. And typically a recession is going to really pound them. Higher unemployment will hurt the smaller business as well. But most importantly, it's just higher interest rates really puts pressure on small businesses. But the idea that the Fed paused today, the S&P 500 went down about 1%. The Russell 2000 went up 1.2%. The reason being, they thought with the Fed raising rates, that the Fed was under the belief that regional banks were going to be stabilized. Because if you look underneath the hood of the Russell 2000, the majority of the regional banks are in that Russell 2000 banks. So that gave the Russell 2000 a little pop today. I don't think that's long lasting, especially with the news methodology that Pat West did to see tomorrow. Yeah.
So are they like, just a little bit off subject, but you know, I think it was with Silicon, they had long duration bonds, right? And they should have been short.
Well, it was, yeah.
A lot of it.
I mean, I'm just wondering if that's the trend with all these things.
A lot of it is the run on the banks, which means, so you give the bank $1 to park in a savings or checking account. They're not going to sit on that dollar. They're going to invest it. They're going to lend it. They're going to buy bonds. So what happened was people were pulling their assets out of the bank. They didn't have enough money to pay them the money they needed to pull out. So what they did, they had to sell assets. Like I said, interest rates had come down, or at that time, they bought long dated bonds. So those long dated bonds were now not worth nearly what they were. They had to sell them at a loss. And it was just going to be a continuous cycle. And that's what's happening to the other banks as well. It's called a run on deposits.
So the Fed raising the short term or the short end of the curve is what enticed finally, which is surprising because it's been going on for months, right? T-bills have been paying 4% yields since June, July of 22. But yet the banks were still holding on to these deposits and they weren't paying nearly near that amount of money. And eventually people started to get, to say, more excited about the fact that they could move their money easily into these treasury bills and get these much higher yields. So you start seeing large amounts of dollars drawn off these banks. So, and they have to cover. So they invest a portion of what they take in deposits. They got to sell those. The bond prices had gone down at that point, and they were forced to sell at a loss. But it was really the Fed raising the interest rates that sparked the interest to remove the deposits to begin with. And the fact that they sold bonds, their treasury bills, they're backed by the government. It wasn't that they were bad investments. It just, they're securities that move in price just like anything else. And it just happened to be at the time when bond prices were depressed from when they bought them. So, and you don't anticipate a run on deposits. I mean, you always know there's a certain amount of money that will be withdrawn from your bank. And there are rules around how much liquidity you have to have. And you got to look at over a 30-day period. We even need a Basel III or something. But really it was kind of it's ironic, right? The Fed has to come in and help the banks, but it was that interest rates movement so high that started it. So, and then one of the outcomes, unfortunately, was we have to sell the bonds at a loss. And that's what makes the paper. And everybody reads that and says, oh, that was a really bad investment. Why would you buy something and you lost money? Well, it's a normal course of a bond when, rates are moving and bond prices move with it. It's an inverse relationship. So as yields go up, bond prices go down. So it sounds odd. It sounds like, oh, it's a 5% yield. Well, that just means the price of the bond just dropped. So, but it can happen. I mean, they're supposed to do a better job of managing their cash flow. And, they were concentrated. That was the big thing. A lot of the deposit base can be spread out, highly diversified. A lot of depositors that have 250 or less. So you're covered. Well, that bank serviced high-tech venture capital firms out in California. So they had way more than 250. So a large part of their deposit base had deposits that were well in excess of that. So when they came to withdraw them, that's really what brought some of these places down. It's really that concentration of the deposit base that's key in when a bank has that type of issue. That's why others, haven't had that issue. So, long story.
Yeah.
Sorry.
If I got bonds, I mean, I was thinking, I don't really get bonds, but I guess these banks don't either.
Yeah.
Yeah, interest rates were just depressed for so long, no one anticipated the velocity that these things have gone on.
Right.
So
Right.
you got caught holding assets has just lost a lot of value.
And that
Sell
only hurts if you have to sell that.
them. Correct.
If the world was just going and they didn't have to liquidate,
Absolutely.
they could all out of that 2.5% bond and they'd be fine.
Yeah,
It's when they have to convert to cash, they gotta discount it.
correct.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah, and they anticipate holding those things to maturity.
Yeah.
That's the way they roll them over.
I had a question.
Or you lend them out.
How
So
far out do you wanna look?
anyway, sorry about that.
That's okay. Any other questions
I
on?
thought I asked the
That's
question.
Yeah, this is your.
So page 5 just basically goes through everything we just talked about. Page 6 starts with the holdings. The holdings haven't changed other than the fixed income, and I showed you that last time. The majority of it had been done last quarter. as far as just adding the individual treasury bonds and a couple of Goldman Sachs bonds. So we do have some financials. Obviously, we are very comfortable with Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. JP Morgan's been here on the same day. Crown Dominion. Very comfortable with those two large banks. And then page 8, we'll just go through performance. So the numbers that told you the 3-month was 4.88, so the 1 year is still showing negative 6.05 versus benchmark of 463, and it's still the same 2 reasons that we underperformed. It was the overweight to growth in last year. In the second quarter, the S&P was down 17%, so that second quarter still has that rolled off. I can't wait till it does. So it was off 17%. When we came out here in December, that 1 year number was a negative 15. So just by having a couple of negative quarters rolled off, it really helps the longer term performance. The 3-year number you can see is still very strong. We still have an annualized return of over 10%.
It's a new computer.
I thought someone was backing.
Roomba just started up.
Sound like the camera was panning or something.
And then you can just see the 5 and 10 years still over 6 and 7%, and then since inception, we're at 7.72%. So still on a 10-year annualized basis, you're still at over 7% per year.
And that growth assumption is 6.25?
Yes.
Six-
6.25.
6.25.
Yeah.
So what that speaks to is that the overall allocation, the 60-40, it works, right? Because yeah, and we're taking, enough risk to generate the return net of fees to cover that 6.25, and that's what's really important. So, and looking at longer term, of course, 1 year is not the place to look, but the 3, 5, 10, even the inception, it tells us that the portfolio is giving us the returns that we want or we need to meet the actual assumption rate. So,
Any questions on performance at all? And then as always, I just always bring the asset detail performance, and that just shows you every asset I bought, sold, or held during the period and how its contribution to the portfolio, whether it was positive or negative. So just for an example, the top one, Fidelity Contra Fund, which had been our worst performing manager last year due to the growth pill. So far this year is up 11.5%. So the idea last year was growth really got hurt just because of the Fed hiking rates so fast, like 400 basis points fast, which really hurt growth stocks. We added value last year. It really helped dampen the blow through the second, third, and fourth quarters, but still continued to hold both growth and value at this time, slightly overweight growth. The idea with the Fed cutting rates, if they do, that would be because we're heading towards a recession or in a recession. Again, as the Fed cuts rates, that should be good for growth stocks. So that's why I'm keeping a little bit of a heavier tilt towards growth for the time being. And then, like I said, small caps just should not do well during a recession or going into a recession. But small caps is usually the asset class or sub-asset class that leads you out of a recession. So that would be the time, once we start seeing some pain in the markets, to possibly add to small caps at that time.
You think that pain is gonna come this year later on, or we'll wait till 2024?
I think we're gonna see some pain tomorrow, just,
We've been seeing this here and there.
yeah, and the reason why I say that is, one of the main things the Fed has to do is not just the 2 mandates, and they have 2 mandates. One is full employment, and 2 is price stability. They have full employment right now. Price stability, they're getting there. I mean, inflation was up over 9, they're down around 5. But the main thing that the Fed always has to do is show conviction. They have to let the markets know that they feel like they have it under control, and they have to make you feel that way. That press conference today did not feel that way. There was a couple of questions. The gentleman from CNBC, Steve Leisman, he asked a question today saying they had seen a report about Silicon Valley Bank, not how bad it was, but there was some indications that there was some stress on the bank. And they still went ahead with the Fed increase not this time, the last time, last Fed meeting. And he pushed back on Powell, and Powell kind of stuttered a little bit, he hesitated. And there's been a lot of commentary just since the press conference about how little conviction he showed today. That's gonna spook markets. So they have to get that, because they had lost all credibility last year, right? And they were starting to get it back, and you saw that when we came out in January. I was so mad at myself in the car, I couldn't stop saying the word optimistic when I was in here. I kept saying the market was optimistic, the market's optimistic. I think some of that optimism left today. So we're definitely gonna see some volatility in the near term.
Yeah, we're up, what, 6.9 at the end of the day. We were up over 8.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
you know, and the question is, you know, like I had said, the markets were driven by that optimism that the Fed was basically going to pause and they were going to pivot for the end of the year. So when he came out today and kind of reiterated that that's probably not going to be the case, but it's going to be data dependent. So, you know, our view is in the near term anyway, for the rest of the year, a recession remains a possibility, but we think that it may be pushed into a 2024 event, but it's still on the table. So, and we just see that consumer spending is going to remain strong as long as employment remains strong. So until we start seeing some, I mean, we've seen some cracks, right? New jobs added has kind of gone down over the last 3 months, but we're still adding last job report was 236.
Yep.
That's a lot of jobs. It's not 300, it's not the 500 that we had. So it is trending down, I guess, but it's still pretty healthy. And unemployment's at 3.5%. If you feel good about your job, then you're going to spend money. So, and the consumer's been faced with higher prices for almost a year now. So, and they're still spending money. So the last metric on consumer spending was high. So it's just going to be a longer battle. So what does that mean for us in the market is you get these periods of optimism like we saw multiple times in 2022, only for the Fed chair to come on television and tell us, no, we're going to continue to raise rates, and the market goes back down. So you might see a little bit of pain tomorrow, a little disappointment, but I think, you know, I don't think it's going to be, you know, a big downdraft. But then there's always the unexpected. You know, you have the war in Ukraine, and we've been saying this, I said it in my notes again. That could go in a bunch of different directions. And if it does, then, you know, all bets are off about, we won't be worried about interest rate increases. So we just don't know. And then the other impact that we really haven't digested, and we're starting to talk about it, and it's factoring into whether we lengthen our duration on bonds, is the fact that the banking, if it is a crisis, hopefully not. We've had a number of banks fail. A couple were purchased, or one's about to be purchased. Bottom line is that we'll probably change the risk appetite across the board for banks. So, and the fact that, you know, the recession that which was there, that's always been on the table. We've been talking about recession for a year. You add that and the fact that the banks now are going to have less appetite to lend, means tighter credit. Tighter credit is an equivalent to raising rates. So it will decelerate the growth. Right? We had a GDP number of what, 1.1, just barely over 1%. That's real GDP. So that extension of credit is what helps the economy grow. Businesses expand, they hire more people. So if you see a credit crunch but tightening, then we're probably not going to see that growth, and maybe we get into that technical recession of 2 quarters that are negative GDP. So we'll see. We haven't been able to figure out what the overall impact is, what the appetite of the banks is going to be, but it's fair to say that there's a great possibility that the risk appetite to lend will be lower than it was before any of this happened.
Yeah, like, so at JP Morgan, for instance, that bought a bank that has a lot of high or interest only loans, right? That may go bad. They're gonna not only, although that bank is gone, right? But not only that, that JP Morgan's probably not, well, their whole ratio is all messed up now. It's
Yeah.
different. Their strategy has completely changed than it was 2 weeks ago.
Right, right, and I'm looking at the credit side of it, just because that's what businesses need to expand their businesses. But on a bank level. Yeah, there's gonna be a lot of loan loss provisioning, so we're not gonna make as many loans, so, at the beginning of the year, things were great. We're paying that much on deposits, but yet interest rates are going up, so loans are, the spread, the net interest margin was huge. So now most of those lendable deposits have certainly taken a hit across the board, so you have less money to lend. And you got kind of a iffy kind of environment out there, so we're not gonna make as many loans. Our net interest margin is down, probably have the loan loss provision a little bit more. So from a banking sector, yeah, things have turned dramatically over the last 30 days.
And the banking sector is gonna start laying people off.
I would think so.
Already did.
Yeah.
Already started.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Morgan Stanley just
all
announced
Big
3,000.
employers are talking, we get too much, time to thin out, we're gonna lean out.
They hired a lot during the pandemic.
Yeah,
They did.
right, and they kept.
So that would drive the unemployment rate up.
Except there's a lot of jobs out there still.
Right,
They call what the labor market right now, they call it tight. It's because there's more jobs out there than there's people to fill.
the
So-
JOLTS number that comes out once, so. There's still a lot of jobs out there and people to fill. Yes, that's been coming down too. So that was that's a crack. I don't know if that's a crack, but it's perceived that way. But,
And I guess
Yeah.
the last thing that can really spook the markets is the debt ceiling. As we
Yeah,
get
and-
closer to that, that's just gonna cause a lot of volatility and uncertainty.
I was gonna ask about that, but I was also gonna ask about commercial real estate. Do you think that that's gonna be significant enough of an issue to affect anything in the portfolio? And like, where would it hit? Like large cap or, I guess everywhere, right?
It's gonna, yeah, it would just affect the whole
well,
economy.
banking side.
Yeah, banking, but the
Right.
whole economy. as
Because
well.
all of those loans are gonna reset, right, obviously at higher rates. So. And are they gonna be able to afford to make those payments? And, some of these buildings are not baked or fully.
Right.
they're
Do we
partially-
need that much building?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's,
we've
so
already
I'm wondering, it's like, there's the banking side of it, but there's all the real estate side of that, right? Because then
Sure.
that all goes kind of,
Right. Yeah, so that's another concern. So like, whenever you get something that the skies start to clear and you can see the sun, there's always the storm clouds behind you. There's always something new that rolls
so
in.
which one of these
Fraud.
sort of the things combined, it puts us into the recession in 2023?
Yeah, well, it could be some event that,
Yeah.
or it could be that these inflation numbers, come in worse. We've been improving every single month on CPI. Bob mentioned it was 9.1. Last reading on CPI was 5. And every month we read, it was lower. Maybe not what you expected it to be, but if you were to draw a line, it was trending downward, which is the direction you wanted to go. What happens if that starts to go the other way? I think it's going to be a lot harder to go from 5 to 2 than it was to go from 9 to 5. So, but we'll see. I guess we'll see, because the more interest rate increases we get, if we do get them, and they don't pause, that's just going to put more pressure, and the recession possibility goes high. So,
And somebody wants to get reelected.
and somebody wants to get reelected.
Nothing wrong with that.
All right, sorry.
Any other questions?
So we're comfortable, we know our positioning, again, we're gonna stay neutral in equities. We're almost neutral to target on fixed income and equities, we're gonna remain that way. We are having discussions in the House about duration. We are short right now. So we're trying to determine what the best time to start lengthening that duration. Because that's purely tactical move on our part. So at some point, we're gonna migrate back to what the benchmark is. And what's our benchmark? Intermediate gov credit. So it's like, right now, the duration on that's like 3.86 years. But we're short of it.
Anything else?
I did have one more thing. I threw out a fee discount And I was just curious if it was ever approved.
It was approved by this group,
Yes.
but it hasn't made it to the selectmen yet. Thursday, right? It's
Yeah.
actually going Thursday.
Oh, okay.
I forgot. When
Oh,
I started doing my agenda for this, I'm like, did we never take this to the selectmen? Jay's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm like, I'm
I
thinking.
know,
we
I
never
saw
took
my
it to the
email, I was
selectmen.
like, we did this already, didn't we?
We kind of did
Yeah.
in January.
okay.
Thought I heard the bus backing up over me.
No, no, it was me.
Thank
Like
you.
I said, I put this together based off last one and went, oh no, I don't think we ever took that. So it's going.
Okay, Thursday?
Yep.
Well, let me know, because I've got to do it retroactive, because we
Okay.
charge quarterly, so I'll start it
Okay.
on April 1.
Okay. I will let you know Friday.
Okay.
Sorry about that. That was on me.
No worries.
You've been busy.
Yes. So spring.
Okay, well, that brings us to the investment announcement.
So just, obviously, we had a person previously, I don't know what we're doing for time, is there a hard stop or anything? or-
Yeah, 7 o'clock. Do you have it?
Okay, I'm not gonna-
Well, normally we would, but it's canceled.
Oh, okay. I
Okay.
guess we're good.
Okay, and I won't go, yeah, just take, this is just the piece that I sent out, the 2 little doc sheets below it. So we'll just do that, so just to go through, last time we spoke, went through a majority of my discussion was the Secure 2.0, which isn't specific to the investments, but it's very specific to both plans and there was just so many details I thought it was worthwhile to cover. And so just to go back and get back on the investments. Again, if everyone, when you get a copy, and it's not gonna hurt if you can't see it right now, but the system that we set up for the investment policy, evaluating the investment options, is a 12-point scoring system. And so there are 12 metrics. If it passes a metric, it's going to get a point. If it doesn't. So 12 would be the best score. As long as it's passing more than half of 7 or above, it's going to receive a passing score. And it's color coded on the sheet. And so if you look through, there may be one copy for you guys to splash or yeah. And so if you go through the first 3 pages, page 3 of 12, 4 of 12, and 5 of 12, you can just see it's pretty easy to see the funds that aren't passing, and it's very few. And I'll just highlight 2. The T. Rowe Price Growth Stock Fund, it's in the large cap growth, and I think you guys sort of got a flavor of what's happening in that category. We've seen it was down significantly last year. Year to date, I think it's probably the best performing sector in the US domestic stocks, and so it's sort of ping pongs back and forth, but because of that, specifically, Rowe Price fund has started to not score as well. But for the short term, we're going to just, my recommendation is just to keep it there, because that sector, if you look at it, we have the Vanguard Growth Index. The biggest 8 stocks make up just a huge majority of that. And so for a fund that's not an index and is trying to pick an allocation every so often, it's just going to be on the wrong side of things. And it's just very easy if you're underweight, these guys can tell you better what Meta or Facebook stock is up year to date, or Tesla is up year to date. It's just absurdly high. And so if you don't, if for obvious purposes of what it did the year before, you're underweight it's just going to be behind the scales this year. So it's a category that we have an index fund. It's a very good long-term manager. If you look at the longest term numbers, it's going to look very nicely, but the short term year to date is actually very good. But last year it weighted down so much that we're going to not pass it. But for the options that are available in that category, for purposes of this, and I'm going to follow up with Amy just with notes specific to that, just so that you can keep it in your notes, that I feel that we should maintain it. If you skip through, there is one other fund Well, actually, there's one fund, if PIMCO is not passing this quarter, but for how our investment policy, statement reads, if it's not passing for 4 consecutive quarters, it goes from being on a watch list to something that we really have to know as to why you're maintaining. In this case, the Western Asset Core Plus Bond, it has gone from being a 10 in the second quarter of 2021 to being a 4. And if we skip ahead and look at the performance numbers, you'll see fairly easily, where it's sort of built up. It's on page 9 of 12. And that's, the second column down, intermediate core plus bond. If you look in the third category over, it's down over 1 year through the end of the first quarter, 8%, versus the index being down 4.61% and the peer group being down 5.3%. And so that's for bond funds is a pretty significant underperformance. And so it's going to make it very difficult for it to make it up. And more importantly, it's sort of one of the things that we've seen with this fund is that it sort of ping pongs between being very good and very bad. It's not that extreme, but if we look at the fact sheet, and I'm just going to use the calendar years as the basis of just looking at this. And so this is the Western Core number 2, and so it's the Western Core, Western Asset Core Conquest. If you go in the first column down, it has all the classes, and then we look at the benchmark, and it's versus the IS share. Actually, I'm sorry, the second one down. If we look at the calendar years, down in 2022, the IS class was down 18.85% versus the benchmark being down 13%. So that's a 5% difference, pretty big. We go other years, you're going to see fairly strong performances overall relative to its peers. The other one that jumps out is 2018, where it's down 1.5% versus the benchmark of just 1 basis point of performance. And so again, about 150 basis points or 1.1% difference there. And if we look at, one of the recommendations that I have, the JP Morgan Core Plus Bond Fund, similarly, it has the same on the right-hand side down on the calendar year performances. You can sort of see, where, for 2022, its performance relative to the index. I'm not going to go year by year, but if you see, if you try to pick out years where it underperforms, 2018, it underperformed also. It was down negative 0.6 versus 1. So it's about 7 basis points versus 150 basis points off. And then similarly, in 2015, it was up 0.35 versus the index of being up 0.55. So it's, you'll see good performance, but it's much more limited. It's not where the portfolio manager is trying to be ahead of the trend. And sometimes when you're ahead of the trend, it just either your strategy doesn't work or it doesn't work for a little bit of a while. If you look at the performance for the 1 quarter, going back to page 9, again, the Western Asset Core Bond, if you look at the performance for the 1 quarter, it's good. It's returned positively. But I think overall, if we just look at the assets, it's not a lot of assets, $48,000 in the fund. But I think from a timing perspective, and just also if we're just looking to go per the investment policy statement, it might be just the perfect time to make the change. Again, it's not going to impact a lot of participants. And if you look at the overall performance differences, it's, for times when you're, if you look at, the page 9, if you look at the 5-year number. Where it's in the 87th percentile, and so that's the bottom quartile. It was up 0.18%. The fund that's in its top decile, the Dodge and Cox in that instance, was up 1.93%. The index was up 1.05. And so from the participants' perspective, they're not missing out on much there. But if we can get a solution, and I can't predict the future on how these funds are gonna act, but something that historically has shown a lot of less volatility if we look at on a per calendar basis. I just think it's the best solution. You know, one, we have to, you know, I think it makes sense to make a change. And, you know, like I said, we can dig in deeper to the numbers. But overall, I thought that the JP Morgan was an excellent option. You know, I think Bob as much sort of not intentionally indicated that, you know, I think they're good bond managers over there. And you know, I just think it's be a sensible solution. I don't know what we want to.
So does Mission Square, can they handle that?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
and it'll be just like when we made the change in the large cap growth category.
The letter goes out.
The letter goes
Yep.
out and it's, I forget what it was. It was about a 90-day process
Yeah.
to turn it around.
Yep.
I think it's, you know, just a sensible solution to what we're looking at. Does anyone have any specific questions?
If an investor said, I don't want to do that.
No, in these cases, when you're making these changes, the letter will say effective, let's just use July 1st. The board has reviewed it. We're gonna make these changes and, you know, their choice is, this is where it's gonna go. They have the ability to move it to.
I was gonna
other
say, or they
funds.
can move it anywhere else.
Yeah.
It's gonna automatically move there for them if they don't do anything. But if they choose to pick something totally different, they can pick something totally different.
I want to stay right where it is.
Nope,
Can't do that. That's no longer on the menu.
right.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
Yep.
I'm fine with that. I just wanted
Yeah,
to.
because what ultimately happens is if you just add additional option. What we see historically
The
is.
70 funds we started with.
Yeah, you'd
When
see
I first
no
got it.
movement whatsoever. People would just stay there. They wouldn't make any changes. It just
Ridiculous.
Most
forces
and they'll just go with the flow. If you tell them, you know, we're getting rid of this and replacing it with that.
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And, you know, overall, you look at the sort of the relative volatility nature of the fund in general and the asset category in general and the fund, it's even in the best year, you're gonna see a minimal improvement, you know, but by, you know, the way the investment policy statement is set up, you should act.
Yep.
And in this case, I think it makes sense to do that.
The
Whereas the other
position.
Yeah, whereas the other case, I think it makes sense to be, because you have two options in there already. And each is sort of playing, one's active, one's indexed. It makes sense to be patient there. Here, it's actually the perfect time to replace what has been a slightly more volatile fund with a less volatile.
Do we have to do something to make that happen?
Yep, you'd have to have a motion to close the Western Asset Core bond. IS fund and replace it with JP Morgan.
All right, I would like to make a motion to close the Western Asset Core Plus Bond Fund and replace it with the JP Morgan Core Plus Bond Fund as soon as possible.
One second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
And like I said, we went through the process last time and I forget exactly what it was, but Mission Square handles all the paperwork that goes out to the participants. By law, they have to get at least 30 days notice. I forget, they were a little bit funky in terms of how they handled it. It had to be, I think, a specific date where they had.
They have like cutoff dates.
Yeah, remember, and so we'll find out more as to the specifics and we'll share it with you next time. It might be a situation where the changes haven't even become effective next time. And so for that, and I don't want to take too much time here, but the other piece that I think I'd like to go over next time is, like I said, I understand the role is specific to the investments. The first quarter conversation about regulatory is a little bit off topic. But the next quarter, I'd like to go over also just a very small snapshot as to what participants are doing, because it's important specific to the investments, just to make sure that how they're utilizing the investments to make sure that the way we're setting up the plan makes sense, okay? And we'll go into that furthermore, but, you know, from a quick snapshot right now, if you went through the report and said, okay, let's look at the performance. But, you know, the secondary and maybe the more important piece is to say, okay, where is actually all the participants' money? And if you, like, if the fund that we're just looking at had less than $50,000 in it. Where the majority of the money is right now is in the target date funds. And if everyone just goes, let's go to page 10 to 12. Actually, I guess you're right at page, yeah, page 10 to 12. So, and I always start, because I was born in 1965, I have a majority of my money actually right in that same exact fund, the Vanguard Target Retirement 2030 Fund. And so if you look at the 1 year number, interesting that Bob are doing a better job managing your pension than Vanguard's managing my 401k assets. And so it's down 6.22% over a 1 year number. And so it was a situation, and I think this is what you saw on their end too. It was a situation last year where we saw both sides, the equity markets, both domestic and international, and fixed income, just the bottom fell out on both of them. And so it was a very tough year. And that's a less than ideal circumstance to have. You know, if you go up to the 2020, just think of someone, and we don't have much money in that one, but you know, the 2030, we have a little bit more, but you know, for someone who's in the 2030, I'm 57, 8 years until retirement, to lose 6% is a little bit less than ideal, but that's, you know, how these investments are options going to work. You know, similar to the pension plan, they have sort of an allocation. They're not as proactive as Bob are. But you know, that's how it's set up.
Year to date.
Year to date is better. We've seen a little bit of a return. And I think, you know, if we look also at the percentile rankings for the 1 year, 40th percentile, 50th percentile for the 3, 40th for the 5 year, and then the 10 year, very strong, almost top quartile ranking. So I think next quarter, we'll just sort of look at this performance just a little bit more, because I think we want to just see, okay, this is where the assets lie, this is where new money is going, and then just making sure that it makes sense as to what it makes up, okay?
I'm not surprised they're still in target date, because that's where a lot of them got moved to.
Exactly,
And
and
that's usually what people
the
do.
nice thing about it is that people who tend to be in target date funds tend not to move their money. If that's historically what we see, they just
Yeah, they want
set it,
to handle those decisions.
set it and forget it, and just continue to put their money into the fund. And so we'll next quarter, we'll take a little bit of a deeper dive, but you know, we'll still start with the same thing, but just, you know, maybe spend 5 or 10 minutes just to help, because I think it's important to understand, you know, that they are connected. That, you know, how people are using is how we should be setting up the investment options. So make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
Anyone have any questions? Yeah, well, thank you very much.
Thanks for your time. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks for seeing everyone. You in August, right?
That'll be an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully we get good news between that. Or not bad. Maybe not bad, I'm not sure it's gonna be. Yeah. we're looking.
August 2nd,
August 2nd.
Yep. 5:30.
Yeah, right.
See you later.
See you.
Yeah. All right, we have no old business, but we do have an executive session. tonight, to include Jason and Amy.
And you know, we don't do minutes for the. When she needs to leave.
Yeah, anybody who's not in, we're gonna make an exception for people over 40 inches tall.
So I'll let you know when it,
Could be.
when it ended.
Okay, you'll just email me.
Yeah.
Okay, take off then.
And we need a motion to exit.
No, you just come out. You just come out, you reconvene.
Oh, all right. How do I not know that yet?
Yeah.
So we are out of that executive session, and we have no other business to come in front of the board. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
A motion we adjourn, effective immediately.
Second. All in favor?
Bye.
Here we go.